In this video, we're going to talk about Chandran Kukathas' article on reparations. Now, Kukathas is distinguished in this field. He's at the Singapore Management University. Currently, he's written a lot of books in this area. Our selection is from an article from 2006 entitled Who, Whom, Reparations and the Problem of Agency. And that title actually tells us a lot about kind of the shape of this article. He's going to raise a lot of questions about how would reparations possibly work, with the kind of the assumption that these questions are unanswerable, and so reparations are unworkable, at least in many cases. Here's the main argument. He says this: the pursuit of justice by making reparation for past wrongs, and particularly for wrongs done more than a generation ago, is not morally justifiable, except in some special cases. Now that's the thesis. What's his argument? His argument, I'm going to call the argument from non-identifiability. The first premise says reparations are justified only if the victim and the perpetrator or beneficiary of injustice are identifiable. So you have to be able to identify who did it, who, or at least who benefited from it, and who was the victim. But he says, after more than a generation, individual victims, perpetrators, and their heirs are often not identifiable. Therefore, reparations are often not justified after more than a generation. It's going to be very rare situations where you can meet the necessary conditions for justifiable reparations. Now, I want you to note that this argument treats perpetrators and individuals and their heirs, the beneficiaries, as individuals, as individual bearers of rights and responsibilities, not as members of a corporate or collective entity which bears rights or responsibilities. Now, the problem of descendants is multifaceted. He says the descendants of victims and the descendants of perpetrators quickly become very extensive. Think about how many descendants someone might have after 3-4 generations. And there could be, dozens, if not more, descendants. And that means that the wide extent of those descendants is going to weaken the claims that any individual has. So, for example, let's say that my great-great-great-grandfather, or even my great-grandfather, was done wrong and was cheated out of $100. Well, after 3-4 generations, he could have 100 descendants. That means each of us have a claim on like one of those dollars, which isn't much, right? So that's the idea. So no individual descendant of victims is going to have a strong claim to reparations. Now, an obvious alternative, he says, is to identify not individuals, but groups that are the descendants of victims of past injustice. So what if we do talk now about racial groups as corporations, or not racial groups, but not racial groups alone, rather, but any group that has been mistreated and any group that has perpetrated an injustice. Well, here's one question: which groups are we going to count? Which groups are morally should be treated as a moral collective, whether as a victim or as a perpetrator? Should we cut it by racial groups? What about economic class groups? The capitalists and the proletarians. What about gender groups, men, women? What about religious groups? We could start tracing wrongs done by one religious group to other religious groups. There's a rich history there. What about Yankees fans? We all kind of despise Yankees fans. That's not true. So I know many people who despise Yankees fans. So, are the Yankees fans an oppressed group, and are the despisers a collective group of perpetrators? People who wear Crocs, how should we treat them? So which groups are going to be the morally relevant ones? Why these groups and not others? We need some kind of standard. And the implication is Kukathas seems to think there's not going to be a good criterion here, but maybe you can come up with an account. What about people who don't fall into one of these notable groups, but are the descendants of victims of serious injustice. So, for example, maybe my grandfather is not part of an oppressed racial group, but somebody really did him wrong. What do we do with a case like that? And who is to be included within a group that we recognize as descending from victims of past injustice? Take, for example, a group like the Seminole Indians, who Kukathas talks about. The Seminoles, as he traces the history, which is complicated, were both victims and perpetrators of injustice. Should individuals who are descended from the Seminoles count as part of a group? Should individuals who are descended from both the victims of the Seminoles and from Seminole perpetrators themselves, should they be counted as part of a group to whom restitution is owed? Or are they a group that owes restitution? Let me give you another example along the same lines. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that Thomas Jefferson fathered many children with the woman he had enslaved, Sally Hemings. Okay. And those descendants, many of them passed as white into white society. They were recognized as white and not regarded as black. So what do you do with descendants of those descendants of Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson? Are they owed reparations because they were descended from Sally Hemings, an enslaved black woman? Do they owe reparations because they are descended from Jefferson? Do they count as black, and does that matter? In other words, if we're going to hold white people corporately responsible for the wrongs of enslavement towards black people as a whole, which of those groups do Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson's descendants belong to? Who do they owe? Are they owed money? Do they owe? Do we call it even? What do we do? Who is liable for making restitution? One proposal is that anybody who benefited from slavery can be held responsible to some degree, and that includes all white Americans. All white Americans benefited from slavery, you might say, in this classic American example. But the objections here might be this: well, look, non-Americans also benefited from slavery. A lot of people did business with America and made money off of the products of slaves. Also, more recent white American immigrants who came after the Civil War had no connection. And intermarriage, as we've looked at in the previous slide, means that many people are descended both from the victims and from the perpetrators. What's their status when it comes to reparations? Are they responsible for making restitution or for receiving it? Now, one proposal is this: that we should think in terms of collective liability, collective responsibility, but the collective groups that we should think of aren't the racial groups per se, but instead we might hold responsible groups like companies or churches or governments that were guilty of injustice at a certain point in their history, and say, well, now the same corporation, the same company, the same government is still around today and still remains responsible for making restitution for injustices in the past, which seems very plausible. And in fact, at least many universities and colleges are looking at their own history, and what some are, and asking, do we owe some form of restitution for ways that we profited from enslaved persons in the past? Famously, Georgetown University went through this kind of process. Now, there's a lot of worries to this approach, though. For one thing, many contemporary organizations aren't that old, weren't around when, say, slavery was going on, but some are. And then take an example like churches or other private organizations. Are the churches liable for wrongs that were committed by their members? So I think typically it wasn't the church per se that owned slaves, but members of that church were slave owners. Now, is the church responsible for what its individual members did? And should it have to make restitution for that? That's kind of unusual idea, I think. And then on the other hand, the churches might have done a lot of charitable work among enslaved or liberated persons. Are their collective debts kind of offset by those charitable contributions? And then think about governments. Those might raise unique questions. Can you sue the government? Well, you can sue states, and so maybe they should be required to make restitutions for the harms committed. So one last proposal, which Kukathas doesn't think has much merit, is this. Maybe we just can't identify clear lines of responsibility here. And maybe it's the government's job to rectify injustices when we can't assign clear blame, we can't determine clear lines of responsibility. And Kukathas says, look, whatever's going on there, if the government were to do that, that wouldn't actually be doing justice. You're not giving anybody what they owe, or it's not that the perpetrators or their beneficiaries are being made to pay. It's just got symbolic value. That's not the same thing as restoring proper ownership rights. There's a lot there to worry about, so worry about it.